Hey there, I'm Claire Tansey. I'm a cookbook author and a culinary teacher, and I'm going to show you how to make one of my very favorite fast and delicious weeknight meals. It is a sheet pan supper, and I cannot get over how easy and fast and versatile these meals are. So today I'm going to be making a sheet pan pork tenderloin with potatoes and onions and bacon. It is a magical combination, and I can't wait to share it with you. So that comes from this book, Dinner Uncomplicated, and it is in the Set It and Forget It chapter. I'll just open that up here. And it starts, I've got the oven preheating to 425, and all I'm going to do is prepare my baking sheet. Now, this is a pretty standard rimmed baking sheet. It's quite large, it's about 11 by 17, and I really love that it has this rim on it, because then if the things that get very saucy or if there's a lot of fat or anything is coming off, it's not going to spill over and make a mess in my oven, cause my fire alarm to go off. But whenever I'm doing a sheet pan supper, I always, oh, there's the oven. But whenever I'm doing a sheet pan supper, I always line the pan, either with parchment or with foil. It just makes cleanup so much easier, and as well, it really allows the vegetables that I'm going to put on the sheet pan to really brown up nicely without sticking. So I just use parchment paper. I love it because it's fully compostable. And I'll just get that ready just like that. I learned many years ago that it's always good to use the scissors because otherwise I rip the parchment paper and it rips all over the place and it's not even. Okay, so the pan is ready. Now I'm going to start with the vegetables. So I'm going to start with an onion. There's a magical combination of potatoes and bacon and onion. It is just so delicious. And this is just a really very a straightforward cut on an onion. Now, whenever I'm teaching in the culinary school, my students are always very anxious to hear how I cut an onion. They think there's a right way and the wrong way. Of course, there is no wrong way. The way that you cut it is the best way. The way I do it is I take off what I like to call the Arctic and the Antarctic, and then I slice right on down through the international date line. Easier to talk about an onion in terms of a globe. And then I'm just going to peel off the skin, and I find it's just so much easier if I do it with the onion already cut in half. So that's one half, and then the other one. Now, if you ever find that there is this very thin, almost tissue-like layer here, I just remove that as well, because what it's going to do is make it harder to cut. It's going to make the onion a lot slipperier. So let me get this cleared up here. And then I just want to, the recipe calls for this to be thickly sliced. So, all I really want to do is I'm going to go about, let's see, it's about that thick, not too thin. The idea here is that the onion and the potatoes are going to cook at in the same time. Well, everything's going to cook at the same time. That's how a sheet pan supper works. And so I want the onions to be sliced in such a way that they will cook and get kind of nicely browned at the same time when they're in the oven, so that as the potatoes really cook, the onions will cook at just the right length of time, so that the onions will get nicely browned and cooked when the potatoes are nice and tender. So if I cut the onions too big or too small, they would either potentially still be crunchy or get burnt, but this is just a nice thickness. So I just toss those right onto the pan here. Very easy. Get all this into the green bin. A pound and a half. The recipe officially calls for 16 baby potatoes, but I'm going to use the entire bag because honestly, what am I going to do? Count out 16 and then have 3 left over that I never use? Don't worry about it. So what I'm also going to do here is just cut these simply in half, and again, that's so that the potatoes will cook in the right amount of time. I want everything on the pan to be perfectly ready at the same time. And if I put the potatoes in whole, then they would take about an hour and a half to get cooked, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to cut them simply enough in half. I can show you a little quick close-up on that. Right down in half, and then chuck them all onto the pan along with the onions. No need to worry about where everything is now. I'm going to stir everything all together in a couple of minutes. The beauty of the sheet pan supper is the one pan wonderness of it all. And this is kind of a good formula to use as long as you've got a kind of a nice starchy vegetable like a potato or a squash or even a sweet potato, plus a nice fragrant, delicious vegetable like onions or even peppers are great. And then you can add some protein, whether that's, today we're going to do a pork tenderloin, but you can also use boneless, skinless chicken breasts or large shrimp or even tofu. Lots of great proteins that you can use in your sheet pan suppers that will cook up nicely. And then it's just a matter of choosing the flavors that you have on the rest of the sheet to make a delicious and interesting dinner. And that's a fun way to cook, and as well you can keep the flavors interesting. All right, so I've got the potatoes and the onions here. Now for the secret ingredient, a couple slices of bacon. And this was really the game changer for me in this recipe. I thought, oh yeah, potatoes and onions, good. Pork tenderloin, good. I'm gonna add a little bit of thyme, good. But adding the bacon really takes this to another level. It's just 2 slices of bacon. I had mine stacked up. That's how when I buy a big pack of bacon, I cut it in half and then freeze it in halves. I find that's my favorite way to keep it. So I'm just gonna chop it into kind of biggish pieces. And then I'm gonna add this to the pan and then mix everything around. So I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of canola oil. We do need a little bit of oil here. Very important to make sure that there is a little bit of oil on every single surface of every potato. So just add a bit of oil, and then I'm gonna use my hands to make sure to toss everything together and get those potatoes all nicely oiled up. And then also break up the pieces of bacon. Mine are all stuck together, so I'll get those open up. And I can also open up all the slices of onion. So that's why it's really easy to do this with your hands. You could do this with a spoon, but I feel like it would take you forever. And this is just a great way to get everything all mixed up, because I want all of these things to be covered in oil and then mixed up together. All right, so everything's covered in oil. Now I'm gonna the baking sheet. And so you can see everything's pretty nicely mixed. There's bacon all over every kind of part of the sheet pan, but I'm not gonna be too fussy about it. That's all looking quite good. So now I just have to wash my hands. Oh, actually, why don't I just grab Mr. Pork Tenderloin here instead? So here is a pork tenderloin. This is roughly 500 grams or so. And I find that pork tenderloins come in 2 sizes. You can either get them at about 500 grams or 750 grams. So I find this is enough for 2 adults and 1 child. That's how it is in my family. If you are more people or you have bigger appetites, then look for one that's 750 grams or get 2 of these 500 grammers. Of course, pork is a natural product, so it's not always going to come out the same shape and size. So you just use what you need to, and if you need to get 2, you might actually want to roast them on a separate pan or do 2 pans worth exactly the same as this. So 2 identical pans like this. But what I'm going to do with this is just pop it right there in the middle, and then I can kind of tuck the vegetables around, make it nice and snug around here. And then, now I can wash my hands. I really love using pork tenderloin because you don't have to cut anything. It's just take it out of the package and throw it right on the pan. Talk about easy. So I want to make sure that I get a little bit of oil on the pork tenderloin as well. So I'll give it just one more little drizzle of canola oil, and I'll just kind of smear that around with a spoon. There we are. And now for a little like dried oregano, but for the most part, dried thyme is the only one I like. So I'm going to take 1/4 teaspoon here and sprinkle it over the pork. So let's just see. I like to kind of sprinkle it from on high and give it a little rub between my fingers. Of course, if you had fresh thyme, you could use it, but honestly, you don't need to buy fresh thyme for this whatsoever. The dried thyme is perfect. And now I'm also going to add some salt. And it's about 1/4 teaspoon of salt here, and I'm going to use that over the entire pan. So about half of it will go over the pork. And about the other half will go over the onions and the potatoes and the bacon. Of course, the bacon is salty, so that means I don't have to use quite as much salt, but potatoes are notoriously thirsty for salt, and so you got to make sure that you do use some salt there. I do always use table salt in my recipes. It's the most accessible, it's the most affordable, and frankly, it's the easiest one to measure. So although there are lots of different types of salt available, and in fact I have many of them right here in my kitchen, I really only use table salt for my recipes. Gosh, that was easy. That didn't take long at all. Now I've got this gorgeous pan full of vegetables and bacon and pork and onions, and this just has to go into the oven just like this for about 25 to 30 minutes. I'm going to give it a stir, just the vegetables, a little bit of a stir about halfway through, and in about 25 to 30 minutes the pork will be perfectly cooked and the potatoes will be tender, the onions will be a little bit browned, and that bacon will be crispy. Can't wait. See you back here in about 25 minutes. All right, it has been about 27 minutes, so I'm going to grab that beautiful sheet pan of food out of the oven. Oh, yes, looking great. So let me show you this. You can see that the onions here and there are nice and brown. We've got some beautiful color on them. These potatoes are lovely and tender. Always a good idea just to stab one, make sure it's okay. Yes, very tender, really lovely, and lots of different textures here. I've got some crispy bacon here, we've got some less crisp. A simple weeknight dinner, and certainly dinner uncomplicated. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you again soon.